Simunye is a Zulu word that means we are one, and it embodies a African philosophy of unity and community. And so the Simunye hypothesis is an attempt to explore the validity of that philosophy of unity through a more Western, rational kind of filter and lens. So taking observations that range from the behavior of subatomic particles through to the kind of modern behaviors of social media users, and seeing if all of those behaviors and observations are consistent with a philosophy of unity, that we're all part of one big system. I think the Simunye hypothesis just evolved naturally for me from a process of interrogating the big questions that people do question of themselves from time to time, such as who am I and why am I here? And trying to get to the root of identity and separating identity from from consciousness as a concept. So saying if I'm more than just my thoughts, unlike kind of Descartesian philosophy which says you are because you think, and saying perhaps I'm not just my consciousness, perhaps consciousness is one aspect of my identity, but my true identity is something bigger. So asking those questions, I think, just turned into thoughts and ponderings and eventually evolved into something that I thought I should write down and gave a name to, and called the Simunye hypothesis. I think it has a lot of practical impact and significance, because I think as soon as you start to reevaluate the questions of who you are and why you're here, you really have a much sounder footing for making decisions about yourself and the society in which you live. So, for example, if you look at some of the world's big systemic problems today, such as global financial instability or global climate change, and you think, well, what is our approach to solving those problems? If you look at the environmental issue in particular, it's a very fragmented, nationally driven approach to regulating the environment. You have international protocols like the Kyoto Protocol, which require voluntary acceptance by sovereign national states to carbon emission reductions. And for as long as we kind of approach environmental regulation in a fragmented national kind of way, we really aren't going to solve the problem, because if one country commits to reducing carbon emissions but another country just increases its pollution output, the environment is polluted. So I think it's basically really understanding identity and unity and the interdependence of different parts of a system becomes a blueprint for creating structures, rules, procedures, societies that are more in harmony with some of the fundamental natural truths within which we live. So making sure that the processes and systems that we work within work in harmony with the natural order of things, than actually in a way that doesn't reflect that truth. One of the outcomes for me of writing the Simunye hypothesis was an understanding for myself, or a belief for myself, of what are human beings. And human beings, I've come to believe, are what I would describe as semi-autonomous measuring agents within a distributed network of consciousness inside a complex adaptive system, a self-organizing, dissipative, complex adaptive system, which is quite a long and complicated definition of a human being. But I really do believe that consciousness is relative to form, and that human beings have consciousness relative to their human bodies and their human societies, but there are other greater wholes that we are components of, which I believe will also have consciousness on a different sort of level. And maybe those higher levels of consciousness are aware of us as components of some higher system. So an example might be, inside the human body, you find types of bacteria that colonize the stomach lining, and they're not aware that they live inside a human. For them, the stomach lining is just their world. That's their environment. And they colonize and live there. And if they grow to, say, proportions where they actually start causing damage to the stomach lining, we will experience that. The host system will experience that as a buildup of acid and maybe an ulcer. And we will take measures as the host system to address that. For example, we might drink some antacid medication. So the bacteria lining the bacteria in the lining of the stomach will then experience this crazy weather condition, which impacts on their society, this flood of white liquid that destroys half of their colony. And for them, that's an unpredictable weather system. It's not some other level of consciousness became aware of a problem inside of itself and took steps to address that. So I think that there's multiple layers that they kind of scale infinitely outwards, infinitely inwards. Different systems, all with their own levels of consciousness, and higher levels may be aware of lower levels of consciousness as a sort of stimulus inside of itself. So, yeah, understanding human beings as being one level of consciousness within an infinitely cascading, kind of hierarchy of consciousness would be one of the outcomes for me, like an understanding of what maybe humanity is. Social media definitely is an evolution of this systemic consciousness, because in any system that wants to maintain itself, it needs to preserve its dynamic balance in the face of change to its internal and external environment. So to maintain that dynamic balance, it needs to be constantly reorganizing and communicating amongst all the different parts inside of that system. So social media seems to be what I would call the new kid on the evolutionary block. It's a way of all the actors and agents within a kind of a distributed network of conscious measuring agents, of staying in touch and communicating and collaborating. So within any network like that, you would expect evolutionary forces to keep favoring the proliferation of information communication networks amongst all the actors and agents within that system for those adaptive advantages. So I think what we're kind of moving towards is an understanding that we can tap in and share our information and our experiences to kind of better organize ourselves as a society and better adapt to the challenges that we find. So the Simunye hypothesis really, for me now, filters almost everything in terms of my understanding of it, in how I approach it or conceive of it. Economic systems would be another one. Over time, economies have basically grown and merged. You used to maybe only be able to trade within a small area and a small network, a local village or a particular city. And now with the kind of communication and travel networks that have evolved, trade has gone completely global. Yet we still sit with these kind of individual currencies. Everybody's got their own currency, and there's a currency crisis going on here. It's going to affect trade over there. It just doesn't seem appropriate anymore to me that if I want to trade with a person in another currency, a certain percentage of that transaction just seems to kind of evaporate into the ether through the currency exchanges and the brokering around that. So politically, philosophically, economically, environmentally, I think there's a lot of implications for me on the Simunye hypothesis.